There is a photograph, taken on July 16, 1950, inside the largest stadium in the world, in front of 200,000 people. In it, a Uruguayan player is running toward the goal he just scored, arms open wide, mouth wide open. And all around him, silence. A silence so absolute, so heavy, that you can almost hear it just by looking at the image. Because in that moment, Brazil didn't just lose a football game. Brazil lost something that has no name. Something that an entire nation had placed into a single match, a single day, a single winter afternoon in Rio de Janeiro. And the most disturbing part of all this isn't what happened on the pitch. It's what happened off it. It's the stories nobody tells. The behind-the-scenes moments buried for decades. The men who carried that afternoon with them for the rest of their lives like a prison sentence. That's what you're going to discover today. To understand the weight of that day, you need to understand what Brazil represented to the football world in 1950. The country had emerged from World War II with a new energy, a desire to prove itself, to show the world it was more than coffee and carnival. And football was the perfect vehicle for that. The 1950 World Cup was the first after the war. FIFA needed to start over, and Brazil put itself forward to host the tournament with a bold promise: build the largest stadium in the world in record time. The Maracana, a monumental construction project that began in 1948 and had to be ready by 1950. Workers slept on site. The pace was relentless. And when the stadium opened its doors, still incomplete, but standing, it felt like Brazil had already proven something to the world before a single ball was kicked. The Brazilian squad at that World Cup was considered the most talented on the planet. It had Zizinho, who many still rank among the greatest players in history. It had Ademir, the tournament's top scorer. It had Jair, Chico, Big Ode, Friaca. It was an attacking machine that had demolished Sweden 7-1 and Spain 6-1 in the final round. Nobody, absolutely nobody, gave Uruguay any chance whatsoever. And that's where the first mistake begins. The mistake nobody wanted to see at the time, but that history made crystal clear. The format of the 1950 World Cup was different from everything before it and everything that came after. There was no traditional final. Instead, there was a final round-robin group with 4 teams: Brazil, Uruguay, Spain, and Sweden. Brazil only needed a draw in the last match against Uruguay to be crowned world champions. A simple draw. And yet, in the days leading up to the game, the Brazilian press was already celebrating as if the title were a formality. The newspaper O Mundo published a headline on the morning of the match that today reads like a curse: "These are the world champions." With a photo of the Brazilian squad. Before the opening whistle. Before anything. As if the game had already been played, the trophy already lifted, the story already written. The story was about to be written, yes. But not in the way anyone expected. The mayor of Rio de Janeiro, Angelo Mendes de Moraes, gave a speech to the players in the Maracana dressing room before the game. He told them they were already winners. That Brazil was waiting for them as heroes. That the entire world had its eyes fixed on them. Imagine being a player hearing that before stepping onto the pitch. Imagine the weight of it. Imagine the psychological trap that speech represented. On the other side of the corridor, Uruguay's manager Juan Lopez did something entirely different. He walked in quietly. He looked each player in the eyes. And he said just one thing: Uruguay has never surrendered to anyone. You are sons of this land. Honor it. No euphoria. No promises. Just a call to pride. It was 3:47 in the afternoon of July 16, 1950, when English referee George Reeder blew his whistle to start the most important game South American football had ever seen. The Maracana held around 199,000 people. Some say there were more. Nobody knew for sure because the stadium still didn't have seats, and people simply crowded in wherever there was space. Brazil started the stronger side. Friaca scored the first goal in the 47th minute of the second half. The stadium erupted. 200,000 people screaming at the same time is something that has no comparison in any other sport, in any other arena in the world. The Maracana's floor literally shook. Journalists who were present described the sound as something between thunder and an earthquake. And that's when Uruguay showed the world who they really were. Not a team that yields. Not a team that gets rattled by noise. Juan Alberto Schiaffino equalized on the 66th minute. And suddenly, that roar of 200,000 people began to change frequency. It was no longer euphoria. It was anxiety. It was the nervous silence of people who sense something might go wrong. Who sense the script isn't being followed. That reality is disobeying what was printed in that morning's newspaper. And then, on the 79th minute, came the moment that stopped Brazil in its tracks. Alcides Ghiggia received the ball on the right wing. He was a fast, skillful player, but he wasn't Uruguay's star. Nobody expected anything extraordinary in that moment. Defender Big Ode moved toward him, and Ghiggia simply went past him, as if Big Ode wasn't even there. Goalkeeper Loisir Barbosa was waiting for the cross. It was the natural move, the move any player in that position would make. But Ghiggia didn't cross. Ghiggia shot into the near post, beneath Barbosa's arm. The ball went in. Uruguay 2, Brazil 1, and 200,000 people fell silent. Not a silence of surprise. Not a silence of disbelief. A silence of collapse. As if the air had been knocked out of an entire nation's lungs at the same time. Ghiggia said years later, in a line that became immortal, "Only 3 people have ever silenced the Maracana: Frank Sinatra, Pope John Paul II, and me." The final whistle came 11 minutes later, and the world changed. What happened outside the stadium in those minutes was just as devastating as what happened inside. People listening to the radio on the streets of Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and Porto Alegre simply stopped, sat down on the ground, wept uncontrollably. There are reports of people suffering heart attacks. There are reports of suicides in the days that followed. The psychological impact of that result was so profound that Brazilian psychologists decades later still used the term mongrel complex, coined by journalist Nelson Rodrigues, to describe the collective insecurity that defeat had planted into the national identity. Nelson Rodrigues, the greatest sports chronicler Brazil ever produced, wrote that week, "Our defeat against Uruguay has the dimensions of a national catastrophe, of a Hiroshima." It was poetic exaggeration, but it was also an emotional truth that any Brazilian of that generation would have understood without needing any explanation. But there is a story within this story that most people have never heard, and it is even more disturbing. Loisir Barbosa was Brazil's starting goalkeeper that day, and because of one goal, one single moment in the 79th minute of a football match, he carried the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders for the rest of his life. Brazil treated him as the one responsible for the defeat. Not the newspapers that celebrated before the game. Not the mayor who gave a victory speech in the dressing room. Not the system that created a psychological pressure no human being could possibly withstand. It is said that years after the Maracanazo, Barbosa went to a market in Rio de Janeiro and a woman recognized him. She was there with her young son, and she said, pointing at him, "Look, son. That's the man who made Brazil cry." The child was terrified. Barbosa left the market without buying anything. He was never called up to the Brazilian national team again. Not for any World Cup. Not for any friendly. Never again. His club Vasco da Gama let him go without ceremony. And when Brazil prepared for the 1954 World Cup, new manager Zeza Moreira publicly stated that Brazil needed a goalkeeper of a different color, a direct racist reference to Barbosa, who was black. Barbosa died in 2000, just months before the Japan and South Korea World Cup. He died poor, forgotten, and with a phrase he repeated to anyone who would listen. In Brazil, the maximum prison sentence is 30 years. I served 50. But the story of the Maracanazo doesn't belong only to Brazil. It belongs to world football, because that July afternoon in 1950 redefined what a World Cup can mean to a people. It redefined what football can do to the soul of a nation. And it left a question that time has never fully answered. What would Brazilian football have become if that goal had never gone in? Some historians argue that the defeat was what forged the identity of modern Brazilian football. That the anger, the shame, and the determination never to live through that again was the fuel that produced the 1958 squad, with a 17-year-old Pelé, the first World Cup won outside the Americas. That without the trauma of 1950, maybe there would have been no miracle of 1958. Maybe no golden team of 1970. The defeat that broke a nation may have been, at the same time, the foundation upon which